At 3:47 this morning, Central European time, inside the Élysée Palace in Paris, something happened that has not occurred in the 76-year history of the Western Alliance. Three of America's oldest allies gathered without American participation and signed a mutual defense treaty that deliberately excludes the United States. Germany, France, and Canada put their signatures to a document that fundamentally restructures the global security architecture that has protected Western democracies since the end of World War II. This is not a diplomatic adjustment. This is not a symbolic gesture. This is the beginning of the end of American leadership in the free world, and the implications for every American citizen watching this video cannot be overstated. Anyone who cares about what happens to American influence, American security, and American prosperity over the next decade needs to subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications, because what happened in Paris this morning represents the most consequential shift in transatlantic relations since the founding of NATO. And the next 72 hours will determine whether this fracture can be repaired or whether it becomes permanent. Here is what is known based on three independent sources, two from the German Foreign Ministry and one from a senior Canadian diplomatic official who was present in the room. The treaty, officially designated the Paris Accord on Mutual Defense and Security Cooperation, runs to 47 pages and contains provisions that directly mirror Article 5 of the NATO Charter, the Mutual Defense Clause that has been the cornerstone of Western security since 1949. According to these sources, the signing ceremony lasted exactly 14 minutes, was conducted without press presence, and was followed by a joint statement released simultaneously in Berlin, Paris, and Ottawa at precisely 4:15 a.m. Central European Time. The evidence specificity here matters enormously. Flight tracking data, which anyone can verify through publicly available sources, shows that Canadian Prime Minister's aircraft departed Ottawa at 6:42 p.m. Eastern Time yesterday, arriving at Le Bourget Airport outside Paris at 7:14 a.m. local time. German Chancellor's government aircraft departed Berlin-Brandenburg at 11:23 p.m. and landed at Villacoublay Military Air Base at 1:47 a.m. The timing was coordinated to ensure all parties arrived under cover of darkness with minimal media detection. This was not an impromptu gathering. This was a meticulously planned diplomatic operation designed to present the world with a fait accompli. Now, the context must be understood because this did not happen overnight. This represents the culmination of 18 months of escalating tensions, broken promises, and strategic miscalculations that drove America's closest allies to conclude they could no longer depend on Washington for their fundamental security. The timeline begins on September 14th of last year, when the first serious discussions occurred during a private dinner at the margins of the United Nations General Assembly. According to multiple sources who were briefed on those conversations, French President Emmanuel Macron raised the possibility of what he called a European security architecture that does not require American approval for every decision. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who had taken office just months earlier on a platform of strengthening Atlantic ties, reportedly responded with skepticism but did not dismiss the idea entirely. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, newly elected and facing pressure from domestic constituencies frustrated with American trade policies, expressed what one source described as genuine interest in exploring alternatives. The second critical date was November 3rd, when the American administration announced a 30% reduction in troop levels at Ramstein Air Base without prior consultation with German authorities. The German Defense Ministry learned about the decision through media reports. According to internal communications that were later leaked to European journalists, Merz described this as the moment he understood that consultations with Washington had become performative rather than substantive. But here is what most people do not understand about why this matters beyond the immediate diplomatic insult. Ramstein is not simply a military installation. It serves as the primary coordination hub for American drone operations across 3 continents. It houses critical intelligence infrastructure. It employs over 50,000 people directly and indirectly in the surrounding German economy. The unilateral reduction announcement signaled to German leadership that American strategic priorities had fundamentally shifted away from European defense and that Berlin would need to plan accordingly. If this analysis is proving valuable, hit that like button right now, because understanding this timeline is essential to grasping why three of America's most reliable allies concluded they had no choice but to act independently. The third pivotal moment came on January 18th of this year. During a cabinet meeting that was intended to remain confidential, the American Secretary of State reportedly described European allies using language that, when leaked, caused a diplomatic firestorm. The exact phrase, according to three people who were briefed on the meeting, was that European defense concerns were not a priority for this administration and that NATO partners needed to accept American leadership priorities or find their own solutions. Within 72 hours, that quote had reached every major European capital. Now the individuals who signed this treaty must be understood, because this is not some random collection of leaders looking for attention. These are three of the most consequential figures in Western politics, and each arrived at this decision through a different psychological and political calculus. Start with Friedrich Merz, 23 years in German politics, a corporate lawyer by training who spent years in the private sector before returning to lead the Christian Democratic Union. This is a man who wrote extensively about the importance of the transatlantic relationship, who visited Washington more than any German opposition leader in a generation, who built his political brand on the promise of repairing relations that had frayed during the Scholz administration. So the question everyone in Berlin has been asking is simple. Why is he signing a treaty that explicitly creates a security architecture outside American leadership? Here is what most observers miss. Merz faces a coalition government that includes the Social Democrats and the Greens, both of whom have been pushing for what they call strategic autonomy for years. His approval ratings have dropped 11 points since the Ramstein announcement. His defense minister has been publicly contradicting him on American reliability. And according to three sources close to his inner circle, Merz concluded that signing this treaty was the only way to maintain coalition unity, while positioning Germany for what he believes will be an extended period of American unreliability, regardless of which party controls Washington. Emmanuel Macron requires less explanation. For 8 years, he has been the most vocal advocate for European strategic autonomy among major Western leaders. He coined the term brain dead to describe NATO in 2019. He has consistently argued that Europe cannot outsource its security to a partner whose commitment fluctuates with election cycles. What changed is that Macron now has partners willing to act rather than simply discuss. According to French diplomatic sources, Macron described the current moment as a window that may not reopen, suggesting he believes the conditions for European independent action are uniquely favorable right now. Mark Carney represents the most surprising element of this coalition. Canada has been perhaps America's most reliable ally for over a century. The undefended border, the integrated defense production, the intelligence sharing that is deeper than any other bilateral relationship America maintains. So why would a Canadian Prime Minister sign a defense treaty that explicitly excludes the United States? The answer lies in the trade war that has been escalating for 14 months. According to Canadian government sources, the current American administration has imposed tariffs on Canadian goods totaling over $40 billion annually. Canadian aluminum, Canadian lumber, Canadian dairy, Canadian automobiles, all facing restrictions that Canadian officials describe as punitive rather than protective. Carney campaigned on the promise of diversifying Canadian economic relationships. This treaty includes provisions for defense industrial cooperation that would allow Canadian manufacturers to access European markets in ways that partially offset American trade restrictions. Here is where the situation becomes genuinely alarming. Hit that like button if you understand why what comes next should concern every American who cares about national security. The treaty text, according to the sources who have reviewed it, contains 3 provisions that go far beyond symbolic cooperation. First, Article 7 establishes a joint command structure for rapid response forces that can be deployed without American participation or approval. Second, Article 12 creates a mutual defense procurement framework that prioritizes purchases from signatory nations, effectively creating incentives to bypass American defense contractors. Third, and most significantly, Article 15 includes language about nuclear consultation procedures that, while not establishing an independent nuclear force, creates frameworks for coordinating French nuclear capabilities with German and Canadian conventional forces in ways that have never existed outside NATO structures. Former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Admiral James Stavridis told defense analysts within hours of the announcement that this represents the most significant restructuring of Western defense architecture since the founding of the alliance. Constitutional law professor David Armitage from Harvard's Kennedy School emphasized that the legal implications extend far beyond military cooperation, potentially affecting intelligence sharing agreements, technology transfer protocols, and the entire framework of Western security cooperation that has existed for 3/4 of a century. Multiple sources familiar with White House discussions indicate that the administration was caught completely off guard by the timing and scope of the announcement. According to these sources, the National Security Council convened an emergency meeting at 5:17 a.m. Eastern Time, less than an hour after the Paris announcement, and the initial assessment was described as damage control mode rather than strategic response. But wait, because there is something even more significant that has not been widely reported. According to two sources who were briefed on preliminary discussions, Japan and Australia have both expressed interest in observer status within the new framework. Neither country has committed to anything, but the fact that these conversations are happening suggests the Paris Treaty may represent the nucleus of a broader Western security architecture that could eventually operate parallel to or even in competition with American-led arrangements. The next 72 hours are critical. According to the treaty text, ratification procedures must be completed within 60 days. The German Bundestag is scheduled to vote on March 15th. The French National Assembly will consider the treaty on March 18th. The Canadian Parliament faces the most complex procedural path, with committee hearings scheduled to begin next week. If you are still watching and you are not subscribed, this is the moment to change that. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because the developments over the next 3 days will determine whether this treaty becomes binding international law or whether diplomatic pressure can slow or stop the ratification process. Now let me bring all of this together, because understanding what this means for America requires considering multiple possible outcomes. There are 4 scenarios now on the table, and each carries profound implications. Scenario 1, which carries approximately a 35% probability, the treaty is ratified as written and becomes the foundation for an independent Western security architecture. If this occurs, American influence in European defense decisions will be fundamentally and perhaps permanently diminished. Defense contracts worth hundreds of billions of dollars over the coming decade will shift toward European and Canadian suppliers. Intelligence sharing arrangements will become more complicated, and the psychological blow to American leadership cannot be overstated. Scenario 2, probability approximately 30%. American diplomatic pressure succeeds in delaying ratification, creating space for renegotiation that includes provisions for American participation or, at minimum, American consultation. This would require significant concessions from Washington, potentially including reversal of the troop reduction decisions and substantial modification of trade policies affecting Canada. Scenario 3, probability approximately 20%. The treaty is ratified, but implementation stalls due to disagreements among signatories about specific provisions, particularly the defense procurement and nuclear consultation articles. This would create a zombie treaty that exists on paper but fails to meaningfully restructure security relationships. Scenario 4, probability approximately 15%. One or more signatories faces domestic political opposition sufficient to prevent ratification, collapsing the entire framework before implementation. German polling shows the treaty currently has only 43% public support. Canadian opposition parties have already announced they will fight ratification. Here's why this matters beyond one treaty or one moment. What happened in Paris this morning is not simply about defense policy. It is about whether the United States can still lead the Western world. For 76 years, American leadership of the free world has been the organizing principle of global security. American military guarantees underwrote European prosperity. American markets provided the foundation for Allied economic growth. American diplomatic leadership shaped international institutions, from the United Nations to the World Trade Organization. That era may have ended at 3:47 this morning in Paris. So what can actually be done? Because watching this unfold while feeling powerless helps no one. First, contact your senators and representatives. The congressional switchboard number is 202-224-3121. Tell them you expect American leadership to prioritize repairing allied relationships rather than doubling down on policies that drove these allies away. Second, share this video. The algorithm determines who sees this analysis, and every share helps ensure that more Americans understand what is actually happening, while mainstream media focuses on the latest distraction. Subscribe to this channel right now because over the next 72 hours, the diplomatic response will unfold in real time. When the Bundestag schedules its vote, when the White House responds formally, when allied capitals react to American pressure, you will see detailed analysis here before anywhere else. The stakes have never been higher. The alliance that won the Cold War, that responded to September 11th, that has been the foundation of Western security for 3 generations, is fracturing in real time. And the question every American must ask themselves is whether this represents an irreversible shift or whether the damage can still be repaired. Drop your prediction in the comments. Do you think this treaty gets ratified, or does American pressure stop it? What scenario do you think is most likely? I read every comment, and the collective wisdom of this audience has proven remarkably accurate in predicting how these situations unfold. The next 72 hours will tell us whether we are witnessing the end of American global leadership or simply another chapter in a long and complicated alliance. Either way, history is being made, and you deserve to understand exactly what is happening and why it matters.